What makes news Catholic? Or rather, what makes Catholic news? Is there a difference between secular news and Catholic news? Are Catholic news restricted to covering items that only concern the Catholic Church, or can they include anything as long as they approach it from a Catholic perspective? These are some of the questions that we will be exploring today. But first, there are a lot of news that are covered every day around the world. Have a look at some of these and see if you think that any of them could be covered by a Catholic news agency. Those were some of the stories that have been mentioned in the news in the last year. Do you think that some of them could have been covered by a Catholic agency? Now, to help us sort that question out and also to answer our question of the week, we're now joined by the director of the oldest and largest English-speaking Catholic news service in the world, Catholic News Service. Tony Spence, welcome. And sitting with us is also Alicia Ambrosio. Alicia is the host and producer of the new Salt and Light production, Vatican Connections. But before Alicia worked at Salt and Light, she got her start as an intern for the Rome Bureau for CNS, for Catholic News Service. So welcome both of you. So we've seen this clip, lots of news items. Could any of them possibly be covered by CNS or a Catholic news agency? What do you think?
Yes, Pedro, I think so, and thank you for having me here today.
Yes.
I think all of them could be covered by a Catholic news outlet legitimately, because as we always say, we cover the church for society and society for the church. So just about anything that occurs in society is fair game for a Catholic news agency to cover.
So how would you take something, let's say, I don't know, the royal wedding or something like that that seems not very Catholic or of concern to Catholics, unless they want to follow the royal wedding, but they could follow that on any other they could watch CNN. Why would it be covered by CNS?
Well, that's a good question, but the royal wedding, the royal family, of course, is royalty to many people of the former British Commonwealth in many nations, including Canada.
Right.
So, and that includes Catholic Canadians, Catholic Britons, Catholic Scots, Catholic Welsh people. So they have a big interest in who will be the future head of state for their nations. Also, as we know, the British government is thinking about changing the line of succession so that now Catholics can marry.
Exactly.
Yes.
So that's something we would definitely, I can just see a piece, Tony, Catholics in the royal family. I think CNS should totally do that.
So would you then look at, I guess we're talking about the royal wedding, you look at that story, the royal wedding, and see, well, how can we approach this from a point of view that specifically concerns Catholics, and then approach the story from that angle in terms of, let's say, the line of succession? Or would you just cover it? Do you always have to find that Catholic angle?
Well, I think that depends. I'm of the mind, but then remember, I was trained in a European environment where being a Catholic outlet doesn't mean that you're only covering what this cardinal said, what this, the Catholic reaction to what's happening. But being a Catholic outlet means covering anything that's going on, whether it's politics, whether it's pop culture, whether it's finance, business, whatever. But you're really bringing your Catholic ethics, which are not that different from what's fundamental journalistic ethics, which unfortunately in many parts of the world are kind of falling away and dissipating, and it's becoming infotainment. So I think a Catholic outlet can cover all of that.
Is there a difference between this approach in Europe and the way it would be in the United States? Because I think in North America we see, the Catholic Register. Here in Canada, any of what we do at Salt and Light, for example. that it's very different than some of the news items that are covered in the secular press.
Yes, there are Catholic news outlets across the world, and of course they are not all uniform. Every Catholic news outlet, would you say, Alicia, really reflects the culture that they report in. And journalistic ethics should be constant, and standards should be constant. But of course, it reflects culturally too. So what would be how we might report something in the United States or Canada could be very different from Spain or Brazil or Indonesia, for that matter.
Okay, so then do you still have to find something, that Catholic angle, that Catholic connection, or can you just report a story for what it is,
I think
and leave it at that?
Yeah, I think touching on what Tony was saying, it depends where you are. If you're in North America, the tendency is, yes, you have to find what's the local Catholic bishop saying in regards to this? What's the Catholic Association for whatever saying in regards to this? Whereas in other places in the world, if you're a Catholic media outlet, it's just, what's the real story? And in some cases with the Catholic media in different parts of the world, reporting on a story from the Catholic perspective means, what is the rest of the media not telling you? What's the other half of this story that you're not getting anywhere else?
Okay.
That's what I see.
That's exactly right, I think, Alicia. And we have to remember who is our audience. Primarily, the audience for Catholic media is Catholics, but it's not the only audience.
Okay.
Certainly, it's for people who have an interest in the church, or people who want to know what the church is thinking or doing, and what Catholics who are members of the church think are doing, and how they're operating in their society.
Is it fair to say that Catholic media is about Catholic voices and having that voice being expressed? And if so, is Catholic media responsible for also showing the other voices, the other perspective?
Ooh.
Because sometimes, like, I've done stories here, let's say the euthanasia story, and then all the pro-life people will get upset because we might have interviewed someone who's pro-euthanasia, because we're showing the other side. What do you think is the responsibility as a journalist, to show both sides, or mainly show, the Catholic side?
I think certainly Catholic journalists have a responsibility to point out what the church teaches, what the church says in public policy issues and these issues that affect society. But you also have to understand the context, don't you think, Alicia, that these statements and these teachings occur in. You can't know what you're supposed to do unless you know what you're not supposed to do. That's put simply. But
I think especially with like the hot button issues, like the pro-life issues, and similar, I think there is an obligation as a Catholic journalist to show both sides. If you're going to interview someone who's pro-euthanasia, who's against euthanasia, you have to interview someone who's pro-euthanasia, because you're not going to get that perspective anywhere else anymore. The reality is, in North America, mainstream media is, especially in Canada, so dominated by one group or two groups. Like in Canada, all of our media outlets are owned by the same two companies. So there isn't a plurality of voices, there isn't a plurality of opinions, and whatever the dominant mindset is at the big companies, that's going to be reflected in what the reporters are reporting. If they're writing about the March for Life or something like that, they're going to show you, they're going to go first of all to the pro-choice
response.
Yes, and they're going to give you a very limited response from the pro-life side. So I think it's our responsibility with those hot button issues, like the right to life issues, to show both. But I think it's also our responsibility to not be afraid to report when someone on our team, when someone from our side of the fence, so to speak, does something that they shouldn't have, or says something they shouldn't have, or really crosses a line.
With the sex scandals.
That's true, and these issues are very difficult in society, but they also it's easy to think that these are just public policy issues that kind of live up here at 30,000 feet. They are really issues about human beings' lives. And so you have to, and the pro-life issues, euthanasia, abortion, These are very precious issues, and I think as Catholic journalists, we have a responsibility to find that human story. How is this person struggling with that issue?
How do you then stay away from being labeled as biased if you're showing, is your job as a Catholic journalist to explain the pro-life side? I don't know, maybe it is. Or is it just to report on the issue? Or both?
Well, no, I think as Catholic journalists, we have a special responsibility to report, certainly as all journalists do, to report fairly, to report evenly, but we have an extra responsibility to report clearly what the teaching of the church is, or the position of what the church is on whatever particular issue that is. And we also have a responsibility to report with charity, which often gets missed in mainstream media. They can leave a lot of bodies in the wake, So, but we try to, do no harm, if we can.
Yeah. Okay, we're going to take a little break right now, but it's a short break, so don't go anywhere. We're talking about Catholic media, Catholic news, and what makes Catholic news. When we come back, we're going to specifically hear parts of a message from Pope John Paul II to journalists. So stay tuned.
Let us know your perspective. Email us at perspectives@saltandlighttv.org or reach us by mail. Perspectives at Salt and Light Television, 114 Richmond Street East, Toronto, Ontario, M5C 1P1, or call us toll-free at 1-888-302-7181. Let your perspective be heard.
Christian communicators will communicate hope credibly if they first experience hope in their own lives. And this will happen only if they are men and women of prayer. Empowered by the Holy Spirit, prayer enables us to be ready always with an answer to everyone who asks a reason for the hope they see in us. This is how the Christian communicator learns to present the message of hope to the men and women of our times with the force of truth.
That was a message by Pope John Paul II in 1998 on the feast day of St. Francis de Sales, who's the patron saint of journalists. I was very intrigued by the word hope, because you wouldn't think that the role of a journalist is to give hope. But maybe for a Catholic journalist it is.
Well, what it makes me think of, Pedro, is, when I was still studying, part of my program was to go out and, be an intern, and I ended up in Milwaukee for a month, writing for their Catholic paper there. And a good portion of what they did was, news, what's going on in the community. But they also dedicated a good portion of the paper, like the back page of their paper, to a different person every week, a person of hope, a person who inspired. Okay. So people from the community would write in and say, you really need to feature this person. Right. At first I was like, well, what's up with that? Yeah. And the managing editor, she explained that they kind of just started doing it because they wanted a different way to feature people at different parishes. And they started finding these really amazing stories, like the average person in the parish, maybe the sacristan, or the kid who faithfully helps out with the choir or whatever. And there were amazing stories behind these people that you would just never guess by seeing them at Mass. And the reply they got to those stories, to those profiles, was, that inspired me. That really gave me hope. I'm going through a difficult moment and I read this story about this person's life, and it really gave me hope that this can turn around. And I got that same reaction at different places I've been, where I've been writing for a paper, that people want to know what's going on in the community, but there's something about hearing what's been going on, seeing the stories where you see God has been present.
I like that. Our tagline here at Salt and Light for the longest time was your Catholic channel of hope, and I love that our job is to bring hope. In a way that you made me think of community newspapers, where they focus on the community, but a large news agency doesn't, there's so many news that we need to tell the news. That's different than telling featuring the sacristan.
But it's there. Like
But is it? So
I
would
think
you
it is, and I see I've seen that in some of the reporting from your Rome bureau. They cover some really tricky situations, and the one that comes to mind is a series of pieces from Medjugorje, and we know that there's controversy around the legitimacy of the apparitions there. And there were a series of stories about the good that's happening in Medjugorje, despite the question marks around, the apparitions there. There were stories about the home for men struggling with addiction, the home for orphans, the way that the stories about how the town has been revived because of people going. That's hope. I mean, that's news, but it's also hope. It's bringing hope.
Yeah, okay.
It's the same thing with, of course, we've had so many natural disasters in North America this past year. The most prominent of which was Hurricane Sandy hitting the East Coast, and it destroyed so many homes, and people's lives were turned upside down. But there were so many wonderful stories of Catholic people reaching out to not just other Catholic people, but to everybody in the community, and setting their own hurt and pain aside to reach out for other people. It's these wonderful stories of hope that people find so inspiring. And of course, the three great Christian virtues, faith, hope, and charity, is everybody's responsibility to foster, including Catholic journalists, I think.
Right. The mission of CNS, of Catholic News Services, is to spread the gospel. So is that what you mean? That's how you're spreading the gospel, by telling these types of stories?
I hope so. I hope so. We try very hard every day to do that. Catholic journalism, Alicia and I have been Catholic journalists. I longer than she, but we've been, that's our profession. But more than that, it's an apostolate for us. We do this because we believe it. So part of every apostolate in the church is to spread the gospel, part of the Great Commission,
So how do you do that without appearing preachy or dogmatic?
Going back to my intern days at CNS, I think one of the first lessons I learned was you have to cut through the kind of the jargon, the very church-specific language that only the person who wrote that document is going to understand. You have to unpack it. I really always keep in mind, like my mother sitting at home reading these articles in the local Catholic paper, I want her to be able to understand it, even with her ESL vocabulary. And we have to realize that we're reaching a lot of people with a vast background, vast educational background, and you have to unpack it in a way that everyone can understand it.
Right. Is there a difference between a Catholic writer specifically covering Catholic news for a secular paper and a Catholic press agency?
There's a difference in the missions of the organization, I would say. Yeah. There's a distinct difference in the mission from that the Globe and Mail, for instance, would have a distinct mission in Canada, but Catholic News Service has a distinct mission reporting on religion in Canada. So there are. But for a Catholic who is a working journalist in a secular organization, I think we bring, those of us who have worked for secular organizations, bring our sensibilities about that, our faith, our hope, our charity, and we reflect, our work should reflect out of that, just as a healthcare provider working in a secular institution or an educator working in a public school would have those qualities of being a Christian, ought to be apparent.
Do you think there are any challenges that a Catholic news service would have that a secular news service would not have?
Yes, certainly. Yes, we do. First and foremost, I think, Pedro, it's always financial. We always have financial challenges in a religious news gathering organization. Yes. So that put aside, there are others, and you mentioned that earlier, that there are people who are very passionate about their beliefs. And when we, I think, fulfill our responsibilities to report fully about those beliefs, how they operate in society, challenges to those beliefs, you just get clobbered, from both sides. But, we knew that going in.
Yeah, and I think there's a bit of a myth that if you're working in the Catholic Church, if you're working for Catholic media, you're working in a very uniform bubble. That, everyone's on the same page, that you're operating in an environment where there's no plurality of opinions. I think that's, from the outside looking in, I think that's one of the myths, when we all know that there are a myriad of opinions, and like you said, there's people with all different kinds of opinions who are very passionate about their opinions and vocal about those opinions, and also really willing to tell you when you're not meeting up to their expectations.
Absolutely, and it's the Catholic community is so large in North America. 40-something% of Canada and 23% of the United States. It's 65 million Catholics in the U.S. and 14 million Catholics in Canada. That's like those are like nations in nations.
Exactly.
So and it is totally unrealistic to expect that there will be a uniformity of opinion or even a uniformity of catechetical experiences, among those people. In a way, it's a happy problem,
Yeah, maybe just in closing, to go back to the original question, then how would you answer the question of the week? What makes a news item a Catholic news item?
Tony said something earlier off camera that issues of public policy, issues of like national politics will always be Catholic, because
so anything that concerns Catholics.
Well, because it touches people. It touches people's lives. It's going to touch their well-being. It's going to touch their financial, emotional, social well-being.
Right.
And so that's a Catholic story, because that's what we're concerned about, the well-being of the person and the dignity of the human person.
Yeah, and I guess the Catholic Church has something to say about every aspect of our lives.
I haven't found an issue yet that the Catholic Church did not have an opinion about one way or the other.
Well, that's good to know.
So, and two, there's 1 billion Catholics in the world, and the institutions are so large, and our Catholic institutions are part of people's lives. They went to a Catholic healthcare institution and got well. They went to a Catholic school and got their education. They got in a dire situation, in a Catholic charitable situation where their parish helped them. They live in parishes. There's almost no issue in society that you cannot say is not a faith issue. So,
well, good, thank you. We're going to close our conversation by leaving the last word to the one who is the Word. And so today's scripture passage is from Matthew chapter 28, verses 18-19. And Jesus came and said to them, "All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Go therefore and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything that I have commanded you. And remember, I am with you always to the end of the age." That's from Matthew chapter 28, verses 18 and 19. Alicia.
I mean, I know that passage is about the call to discipleship, but what jumps out at me is the line, "Know that I'm with you to the end of the age." And that makes me think that that to me makes me think whatever I'm doing, no matter how big, how small, whatever story I'm covering, He is with me. And so I need to remember that, and I need to carry that, and I need to reflect that in how I'm approaching my work. And maybe, hopefully, in the way that I'm telling the story, in the way that I'm approaching it, I'll touch someone's heart, I'll touch someone's mind, and open a door.
Thank you. Tony.
That's very well put. It makes me think about Pope Benedict called for the new evangelization and the Great Commission, of course, affects all of us to go out and transform the world in the light of the gospel. No matter what our ministry or our apostolate is in the church, we still have that obligation to go and bring the gospel to people whose lives, who may have never heard of the salvific words of Jesus, and the opportunity there. As Catholic journalists, it's a great privilege for us to be able to tell the story of the church and of Catholics and their faith that will transform a heart out there, or many other hearts. So.
Thank you very much. Thank you both. We've been speaking with Alicia Ambrosio. She's the producer and host of the new Salt and Light television series, Vatican Connections. And with us also was Tony Spence. He's the director and editor-in-chief of Catholic News Service. You can find out more at their website, catholicnews.com. We've heard from them, and now it's time to hear from you. We'd love to hear your perspective. Send us your comments through our Facebook page. That's all for tonight. May God bless you and your home.